I've known Josh since middle school. We were those kids who always ended up in the same homeroom, sat next to each other in science class, partnered up for projects, not out of friendship at first, but convenience. But somewhere along the way, that convenience turned into loyalty. Over the years, we became tight. He's the kind of guy who'd give you the last slice of pizza without hesitation and then make fun of you for how fast you ate it. That's just Josh. We'd hung out at his place plenty of times, after school, weekends, you name it, but I'd never stayed the night. His house wasn't far from mine, so I always ended up heading home before dark. Still, I'd been curious about what it'd be like to actually sleep over. There was something about that house, clean, quiet, always smelling faintly of coffee and old books, that made me feel oddly at peace. Or maybe it wasn't the house, maybe it was his dad. Mr. Carter was a presence, not the loud kind, not the my house, my rules kind either, just still, confident. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. He was in his mid-40s, tall with a trim beard and eyes that felt like they saw more than they let on. I didn't know much about him. Josh never talked about his family much beyond the basics. Divorced, just him and his dad. That's all I ever got. So when Josh casually invited me to stay over one Friday night, dude, just crash here. We'll order wings, watch something dumb, you don't have to Uber home. I didn't hesitate. It was the end of a long school week, and the idea of zoning out on his couch sounded perfect. But as I packed an overnight bag, something in me fluttered. A weird combination of excitement and nerves. It wasn't about Josh. It wasn't even about staying over. I think deep down I was curious about Mr. Carter. About being under the same roof in a quiet space where we'd maybe talk more than just polite hellos and goodbyes. When I arrived that evening, the front door swung open and there he was. "Evening," Mr. Carter said with a nod, stepping aside to let me in. His voice had that smooth, gravelly calm to it, like he never raised it above what was necessary. "Hey, Mr. Carter," I said, trying to sound chill, though my heart gave a tiny jump. He looked at me for a second, just a little longer than usual. His eyes traveled from my face to my bag, then back up. Nothing creepy, nothing off, just curious. A flicker of something I couldn't quite place passed across his face before he stepped into the living room. Josh was already on the floor, 2 controllers in hand and a pizza box open. "You're late. I already started winning," I laughed and kicked off my shoes. "Let me fix that." The night was easy. We played games, talked trash, inhaled greasy food, and flipped between movie trailers we'd never actually watch. Mr. Carter drifted in and out of the room, usually with a book in one hand and a mug in the other. Sometimes he'd comment on our game or offer a dry joke that made both of us laugh harder than expected. I caught him watching me once, just for a moment, when he passed behind the couch. Our eyes met, and he gave a half smile before disappearing into the hallway. By midnight, Josh stretched out on the floor and mumbled something about being dead tired. He grabbed his blanket and wandered off to his room without ceremony. I figured I'd stay on the couch. It was comfortable enough, and I didn't want to bother Mr. Carter by asking about other arrangements. I turned off the TV, tossed my hoodie over myself, and lay back on the cushions. The house was silent, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of settling wood. For a long while, I just stared at the ceiling in the dark, wondering why I couldn't shake the heat in my chest. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was something. But either way, I knew I wasn't falling asleep anytime soon. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I woke up. Not because of a sound or a nightmare, just something. A subtle shift in the air, like when the weather changes and the silence becomes heavier. I blinked into the dark living room, disoriented, heart ticking a little faster than usual. The glow from the streetlight outside spilled in through the blinds, cutting the room into stripes of shadow and pale amber. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes, unsure why I was even awake. Then I heard footsteps, soft, measured, from the hallway. A moment later, the kitchen light flicked on, not the overhead one, just the little bulb beneath the cabinets. A warm, low glow lit up the kitchen corner. "Didn't mean to wake you," a voice said quietly. Calm, familiar, Mr. Carter. He was standing barefoot, wearing a dark gray t-shirt and drawstring pants, holding 2 glasses of water. He looked at me with a kind of gentle amusement, like he'd been expecting me to stir. "I figured you'd be thirsty," he said. I swallowed and nodded, still groggy. "Thanks." I got up and patted over, accepting the glass. Our fingers touched for just a moment, and something flickered in my chest. A spark. He gestured to the small breakfast nook and sat down, so I did too. For a minute or two, we just sipped in silence, The air between us was quiet but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that lets your thoughts stretch a little. "I usually don't sleep well," he said eventually, staring into his glass. "Not for a while now," I glanced at him. "Insomnia." "Something like that," he shrugged, his voice low, almost too calm. "Sometimes it's just the silence that keeps me up. Sometimes it's the noise in my own head." I let that hang for a second. I wasn't sure if he expected a response or not, but I nodded. "Yeah, I get that." He glanced at me then, really looked, and there was something different in his eyes, not stern, not fatherly, something softer, a little lost, a little tired. "I've spent so much time being the dependable one," he murmured, "the man with the answers. The stable dad, but lately, I don't know." There was a pause. I didn't want to interrupt, didn't want to break whatever thread had been pulled loose. He looked away and chuckled under his breath. "I shouldn't be saying this to you." "You can," I said, a little too quickly. "I mean if you want to." Mr. Carter turned his gaze back to me. He studied my face in that quiet way of his, like I was a page he was trying to read without flipping it too fast. His jaw tightened slightly, then loosened. "There's something I've kept buried for a while," he said. "Not because it's wrong, just because I didn't know what to do with it." My pulse picked up. My grip tightened on the glass. He leaned forward a little, elbows resting on his knees. "I've had this desire, for some time now, something I haven't been able to voice, not to anyone." The kitchen seemed to still. Even the hum of the fridge felt quieter. He didn't finish the thought, not really, but he didn't need to. The air around us had shifted, thickened. My stomach flipped, and not in a bad way. He glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at me. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I'm sorry, that probably sounded strange. I just needed to say it. Once." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because I wasn't sure what to say. My brain was moving slower than my heartbeat. What did he mean exactly? Was it what I thought? Was it me? And even if it was, why did it feel like part of me already knew? Mr. Carter stood then, slowly, as if giving me time to process. He reached for his glass and gave me a small, almost apologetic smile. "Get some rest," he said. "Big day of sleeping in tomorrow." And with that, he turned and padded back toward the hallway, leaving me alone in the soft kitchen light. I sat there for a long time, gripping the now warm water glass, trying to sort through the quiet storm that had just passed through my chest. Was I imagining it? No, I knew what I heard. But what I didn't know, what kept me awake until the sun started to rise, was what I was going to do about it. Birdsong woke me. For a moment, I didn't recognize where I was, my back stiff from the couch, my face warm from the sunlight pouring through the blinds. I sat up slowly, the blanket slipping off my shoulder. And then it hit me. The kitchen, the glass of water, Mr. Carter's voice in the dark, that half-confession. I blinked hard, wondering if I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd been half asleep. Maybe I'd dreamt the whole thing, my subconscious projecting feelings I didn't want to admit I had. But no, the way my heart skipped as I thought about it told me it had been real, too real. I stood and stretched, trying to shake off the fog. From down the hallway, I could hear Josh clattering around in the kitchen. "Yo," he called out. "There's coffee and toast. If you want eggs, you're on your own." "Coming," I mumbled. When I stepped into the kitchen, everything felt normal. Josh was hunched over a bowl of cereal like a caveman. The toast popped up behind him, slightly burnt. Mr. Carter was at the sink, rinsing out a mug, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked over his shoulder when I entered and gave me the same casual smile he always did. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, my voice quieter than usual. There was no hint in his tone, no flicker in his expression, nothing that gave away the fact that just hours ago, he'd told me he had a desire he couldn't voice. It was like nothing had happened. I wasn't sure if that calmed me or made me feel even more confused. I sat with Josh, ate some toast, and half listened to him rant about a glitch in his game from last night. Mr. Carter stayed quiet, sipping his coffee, occasionally chiming in with a dry one-liner that made Josh laugh, and me. I kept glancing over at him, searching his face for any clue. A second glance, a longer breath, something, but he gave me nothing. After breakfast, Josh grabbed his keys. "I'm gonna run to the corner store. You want anything?" I shook my head. He pointed a spoon at me. "Don't eat the last of the Doritos, traitor." Then he was out the door. Silence settled in. I rinsed my plate, suddenly too aware of the sound of water and my own breathing. Mr. Carter leaned against the counter with his mug, watching me. "I wasn't sure if we'd talk about it," he said quietly. I turned toward him, heart picking up again. "So it wasn't just in my head?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls closer. The distance between us charged. He set the mug down and crossed his arms, his voice calm but serious. I've tried to suppress it, believe me, for a long time, told myself it was just a passing thought, a moment of loneliness, but that's not what it is. I swallowed, waiting. I'm drawn to you, he said, his gaze locked on mine. And I know how that sounds, I know it's complicated, but I had to say it fully clearly. Not half asleep, not hidden under polite conversation. My hands rested against the counter behind me for support, the moment stretched, heavy with meaning. You're not imagining it, he said again. I see you, and I think part of me has for a while now. I looked down at the tile floor, unsure how to answer, but the truth rose up from my chest before I could stop it. I've thought about it too, I said softly, more than once. When I met his eyes again, something in them shifted. Relief, maybe, or quiet understanding. He didn't move toward me, didn't say anything inappropriate or rush the moment. He just let it hang there, honest and raw. I don't expect anything, he said. Not now, not ever, if that's how it is, but saying it out loud mattered. I nodded slowly. Hearing it did too. We stood there in the soft morning light, not touching, not even close, but the air between us felt like it had its own heartbeat now. There was no shame, no guilt, just something unspoken that was no longer hidden. I should probably get dressed, I mumbled, breaking the silence with a nervous chuckle. He gave me a small smile. Yeah, me too. As I left the kitchen, I didn't look back, but I felt his eyes on me the whole way. The sun was setting when Josh disappeared into his room, headset already on, mumbling something about multiplayer lobbies and lag. I could hear the faint sounds of gunfire and teammate chatter through the walls. Typical Josh, when he gamed, the rest of the world might as well have vanished. I sat on the couch for a while, pretending to scroll my phone, but I wasn't reading anything. My thoughts were spinning too fast. Every few seconds, I glanced down the hallway toward the closed door at the end, Mr. Carter's room. Ever since our quiet moment in the kitchen that morning, something had been building inside me. Not just curiosity, not anymore. It was something warmer, braver. A part of me had been waiting for this kind of connection for years, even if I hadn't known it. And now that it had finally stepped into the light, I couldn't ignore it. I stood up, heart already racing. My bare feet made no sound on the carpet as I moved down the hall. The closer I got, the louder my pulse became. I paused in front of his door. My hand hovered for a second, then curled into a fist. I knocked, softly. There was a quiet rustle inside, then footsteps. Then the door creaked open. Mr. Carter stood there, wearing a plain black t-shirt and gray pajama pants. His hair was slightly tousled like he'd been running his fingers through it. His eyes widened a little when he saw me. Everything all right? He asked. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I needed to say something. He stepped aside without a word and let me in. The room was dim, lit only by a small reading lamp on the nightstand. There was a book open, face down on the bed. The whole space smelled faintly of cedarwood and something warmer, something like him. I turned to face him as he closed the door behind us. You said, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, you had a desire, something you've carried for a while. He nodded once, watching me carefully, cautiously. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, I came because I think I want to be the one to answer it. His breath caught, not loud but visible in his expression, that small flicker of disbelief, of hope. He stepped a little closer, not touching, not even reaching, just lowering his voice. Are you sure? I nodded. This isn't a game to me either. His eyes searched mine, gently but deeply. You don't feel pressured? No, I said firmly. If anything, I feel like I've never been more honest with myself. A moment passed, then another, and then he reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it said more than words could have. The warmth of his palm against mine, the way his thumb slowly moved across the back of my hand, it grounded me, anchored me to something real. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling me gently down beside him. We didn't rush. We didn't even speak for a while. There was no need. The silence was full of understanding. His fingers traced my wrist, then my jaw, as if memorizing the outline of a moment he never thought he'd have. I leaned into his touch, eyes fluttering closed. When he kissed me, it wasn't urgent or possessive. It was soft, careful, like he was asking a question and letting me answer in my own time. I kissed him back. What followed wasn't something that needs to be spelled out in detail. There were no sharp gasps or dramatic confessions, just quiet moments shared in low light, his forehead resting against mine, our fingers intertwined on the sheets, my heart finally settling into something steady. I felt safe, wanted, seen, and above all, I felt chosen, not in a loud, theatrical way, but in the kind of way that leaves no room for doubt. At some point, I lay beside him, my head resting on his chest. I listened to the slow rhythm of his breathing, the way it rose and fell beneath my cheek. His arm curled around me, pulling me just a little closer, like he couldn't believe I was really there, like he didn't want to let go. "Thank you," he whispered into my hair. "For trusting me." I didn't respond with words. I didn't need to. My hand found his again, and I held it tightly until sleep took us both. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of a pan clinking gently against the stove. For a moment, I didn't move. I lay there, eyes closed, wrapped in the soft sheets that smelled like cedar and warmth. The morning light crept through the curtains, painting the walls in a muted gold. I could still feel the weight of his arm that had rested around me for most of the night. I opened my eyes slowly and turned my head. Mr. Carter's side of the bed was empty, but the faint sound of humming coming from the kitchen told me he hadn't gone far. There was no confusion, no regret. No heaviness, just quiet. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my shirt, and padded down the hall. Josh was already at the kitchen table, hair a mess, hoodie zipped up to his chin, eyes glued to his phone. He barely looked up as I entered. "Morning," he mumbled between mouthfuls of cereal. "Morning," I replied, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. Mr. Carter was at the stove, flipping eggs with a quiet focus, the same calm energy he always had, but now I noticed the subtle differences. The slower breath, the slight curve of his lips when he glanced over at me. He slid a plate toward me with a nod, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I sat beside Josh, who was now mumbling about some glitch in his game. He didn't notice the way Mr. Carter's fingers brushed against mine when he passed me a fork, or how our eyes met across the table for just a second too long. But I noticed, and so did he. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there in the way we moved around each other, in the quiet understanding that passed between us without needing words. After breakfast, Josh shuffled back to his room with a yawn, headset already back on his head before the door even shut behind him. Mr. Carter and I were left alone in the kitchen again. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, coffee in hand. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Meant just for me." I nodded. "Better than okay." A pause. "I wasn't sure what this morning would feel like," he admitted, eyes scanning my face, didn't want to assume. "It feels right," I said. "That's the only word I can think of." His shoulders dropped slightly, like he'd been holding in a breath all night and finally let it go. He looked relieved, maybe even happy. "Last night wasn't something I planned," he said quietly. "But it meant something to me." "Me too," I said, "more than I expected." He stepped forward a little, fingers gently brushing my hand where it rested against the counter. Not a full touch, just enough to say, "I see you, I'm here." I turned my palm over and let my fingertips catch his for a second. There was no rush, no fear, just peace. "You know," he said after a moment, "I've spent a lot of time feeling like parts of me had to stay hidden. That if I ever said them out loud, people would run." I looked up at him, the morning light softening his expression. "But you didn't," he said. "You stayed." My voice caught a little. "Of course I did." He smiled, not a big one, just a quiet, content one. "Thank you," he said, "for not running away, for seeing me." Something about those words sank deep. I wasn't sure anyone had ever thanked me like that before, not for listening, not for choosing to understand. "You made it easy," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "To see you, I mean." Another pause, another moment where silence said more than language could. Eventually, we stepped apart, both of us knowing Josh could walk back in at any second, but something had shifted between us, a quiet bond, sealed not by grand declarations, but by presence, by truth. The rest of the morning passed with surprising ease. We moved around the house like we always had, except now, there was something different in the air. Not tension, something warmer, calmer, like the ache I didn't know I'd been carrying had finally softened. By the time I packed up my overnight bag and slipped on my shoes, Mr. Carter met me at the door. "Text me," he said softly. "Just whenever," I smiled. "I will." Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered for just a moment before he stepped back. I walked out into the morning sun with my heart full, my steps light, and the sense that something real had just begun, something that wasn't finished yet, not even close. It happened on a Wednesday. I'd just gotten home from class, tossed my backpack on the floor, and was halfway through reheating leftover noodles when there was a knock at the door. Not a polite tap, a firm, fast knock. The kind that made my chest tighten before I even looked through the peephole. "Josh." I opened the door, surprised to see him standing there, hoodie zipped up tight despite the warm weather, hands shoved into his pockets, jaw clenched. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Didn't know you were coming by." He didn't smile, didn't move. "Can I come in?" he asked flatly. Yeah, of course. He stepped inside but didn't sit. Just stood in the middle of my living room like it was unfamiliar territory. Something was off. His usual sarcasm was gone, his energy cold. I need to ask you something, he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I nodded slowly. Okay. Did something happen between you and my dad? The words hit harder than I expected. No build-up, no hesitation, just the truth, raw and straight to the point. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. Josh crossed his arms. Because he's been different, like peaceful, happier. I'm not an idiot. I swallowed hard. Do you want the truth? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I paused, and then I nodded. Yes, I said. Something happened. His expression didn't change. He didn't yell, he didn't storm out, but the silence between us thickened like fog. He looked away, jaw tight. He's my dad. I know. This is weird. I know, I repeated quietly. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I was chasing. It just happened. He paced once, then turned to face me. So what, you've just been what, hooking up with him? No, I said quickly. It's not like that. Josh stared at me, waiting. I care about him, I said. It wasn't a game. It's not some secret fling. It was honest. It was something real, and I didn't want to lie to you. For a moment, I thought he might leave, just turn and walk out, but instead he slumped down onto my couch and rubbed his hands over his face. He's been alone for so long, he said, voice low now. Like really alone. I always thought it was just part of who he was, quiet, reserved, but maybe it was more than that. I sat down across from him, watching his face closely. I didn't mean to keep anything from you, I said. I was just trying to figure out what it all meant. I still am. He nodded slowly, then finally looked at me, really looked. It's just weird, man, he said. You're my best friend, and he's my dad. I know. Another pause, then Josh let out a long breath. But you didn't lie, and he didn't either. That counts for something. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, he said. And honestly, I think I've always wanted him to find someone. I just didn't think it would be someone I knew, someone who knew me. He stared down at the floor for a moment before continuing. I guess if it had to be anyone. I'm glad it's someone who actually sees him. That line stuck with me, because that's exactly how it had felt, like seeing Mr. Carter fully and being seen in return. Josh leaned back against the couch, arms folded. I'm not going to pretend I'm thrilled about this, but I'm not going to stop it either. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. He gave me a sideways glance. Just don't get all stepped at on me, all right. I couldn't help but laugh. Deal. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension finally easing between us. It wasn't completely gone. There was still something fragile there, but the worst had passed. Does he make you happy? Josh asked, almost like he didn't want to say it out loud. He does, I said. In this quiet, unexpected way. It's not something I saw coming, but I don't want to ignore it. Josh nodded. Then I'll try to be okay with it. I gave him a small smile. That's more than I could have hoped for. He stood up and stretched. All right, I'm gonna go before this gets too emotional. You still owe me a rematch in Smash, by the way. Anytime, I said. Just know I've been practicing. He snorted and headed for the door, pausing only once to glance back. You break his heart, he said, half joking, half serious, and I break your nose. Fair enough. The door closed behind him, and I stood there in the quiet for a few seconds, letting the weight of the conversation settle. We weren't the same anymore, Josh and I, me and Mr. Carter. Everything had shifted, but somehow it all felt lighter now. Truth had a way of doing that, and as strange as it all was, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Weeks passed, quietly but meaningfully. What started as a late-night conversation and a moment of honesty in the dark had slowly turned into something real, something we didn't have to pretend wasn't happening anymore. Mr. Carter started inviting me over for dinner on purpose, not just as Josh's friend, but something else. And I started saying yes more often than not. At first, Josh kept his distance, not in a cold way, just giving himself space. He'd usually disappear into his room or head out with friends when I came by. But he never stopped being kind. Over time, even that softened. One night he even tossed me a bag of chips on his way out the door and said, "Don't eat all the good leftovers, lovebirds." That was the first time he'd acknowledged it like it was normal, and it was starting to feel that way. Normal. Mr. Carter, or Daniel, as I'd finally learned to call him when we were alone, had a way of making everything feel grounded. His presence, his voice, the way he'd slide a cup of tea toward me without asking if I wanted one. It all became part of a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, Just time spent, cooking side by side, watching old movies on the couch, sometimes just sitting in silence reading in the same room. It was the kind of closeness that didn't ask for attention. It just was. And somehow, that was more powerful than anything loud or rushed. He kissed me when I arrived now, held my hand under the table when Josh wasn't looking, brushed my shoulder when he passed behind me in the hallway. Small things, things that made the world quieter in the best way. One night after dinner, we stepped out onto the porch together. The sky was clear and wide above us, full of stars, the kind of quiet that only comes in the in-between moments after dinner, before goodbyes, when the air is still and the world feels paused. We sat on the wooden bench swing, our knees touching just slightly. He had a beer in one hand. I had nothing but the warmth still lingering from his touch. "I never thought," he said softly, "that anything good would come from that weekend." I looked over at him. His eyes were on the stars, distant but present. "Neither did I said. There was a pause. Then I added, "I thought I was just coming over to hang out with Josh, crash on the couch, eat junk food." "And instead he started, then stopped, looking at me now. "I left with something I never expected," I said quietly. "Not just desire, but love." His expression shifted, softened, the kind of softness that only comes from being truly seen. He reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers together. Neither of us spoke after that. We didn't need to. The porch light glowed above us, casting a warm halo across the old wood floorboards. Crickets chirped in the distance. The night felt alive but gentle, like it was holding us in place for just a little longer. I rested my head on his shoulder, and he leaned into me slightly, our hands still entwined. There was no finish line we were racing toward. No big next step that needed defining. Just two people, one older, one younger, who found something steady in the unlikeliest moment. And sitting there under that quiet sky, I realized something. It didn't matter how strange it looked from the outside. What mattered was how it felt from the inside. Safe, warm, right. So, what would you have done if your best friend's dad confessed his feelings to you? Would you have walked away or knocked on his door like I did? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. And if this story pulled at your heart even a little, tap that like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one.